Well, thank you so much for coming to hear about progressive web apps and Polymer. I know there were 4 other talks and many other activities you could have chosen. There's a talk on machine learning and a talk on IoT business models, and I'm honored that you chose to come learn about this. So a bit about me. My name is Wendy Ginsberg, and I'm a product manager on the Chrome Web Platform team at Google. And the goal of the Chrome Web Platform team is to push the web ahead and to work on super cool advancements with other browsers so we can make the web better for everybody. More specifically, on the Chrome Web Platform team, I work on the Polymer team, hence why my talk is about Polymer. And before I get too far into talking, I want to know a bit about all of you so I can kind of dynamically adjust and spend more or less time on different things. Can I get a show of hands for just web developers in the audience? Oh, wow, we got a bunch of web developers. And how many of you have heard of progressive web apps before? Cool. And then how about Polymer? Anyone used or heard of Polymer? Great. So it looks like we got a big audience of web developers and with some a knowledge of or familiar with Polymer and progressive web apps. And I ask those questions because the main 3 things I'm going to talk about are first Polymer. I'll give an overview of what Polymer is, why it's different, and how it began. Then I'll go into a definition of progressive web apps. And at the end, I'll bring them both together and talk about how you can use Polymer to build progressive web apps. We have tons of resources as Google and as the Polymer team to help you get started in literally seconds with progressive web apps. Cool? Yeah, so first let's go into Polymer. And I want to start by giving a definition of Polymer, or the Polymer library, which might seem a little buzzwordy at first, but then we'll go through and kind of unpack that definition so we can totally get what it means. Right, so Polymer. The library is an opinionated library that sugars web components APIs to make it easy to build encapsulated, reusable, custom elements. We also help with data binding and templating and have a suite of tooling available for you. But at our core, this is what our library does. Other things the Polymer team builds, we build our own elements with the library. Some of those elements are part of the app toolbox, which is something I'll talk about at the end. But it's a suite of components and tools to help you structure your app, deal with layouts, deal with routing and internationalization. And then we also, which just launched out of beta a few weeks ago, run webcomponents.org, which is an open source catalog online with hundreds of super high quality web components built by the community and built by us, not just Polymer components, any components for you to download in seconds and use in your applications. And I mentioned tooling. We also have that. We build the Polymer CLI. It's a tool for your command line, and we build Web Component Tester, which does what it says, tests web components. And we are committed as a team not just to building tooling and infrastructure for Polymer components, but testing and tooling for all web components, whether or not you choose to use our library. So now I'm going to talk a bit about what Polymer is, why it's different than, say, another framework or another method of web development. And the easiest way to talk about why we're different and how we're different is to talk about what problems we solve, to talk about what problems are general for all web developers and how Polymer uniquely is going about solving those. So this is going to be super familiar for all of you web developers, but let's talk about the big problem that everyone is trying to solve now, the reason that we have lots of new tooling for web components, for web development, the reasons we have lots of new frameworks coming out. It's because expectations of web developers are extremely high, right? We're expected to build web apps that work across a variety of browsers, work across a variety of versions of those browsers. And, because browsers don't exist somewhere in space, they have to work across a variety of shapes of screens, resolutions, aspect ratios, right? So everything from a tiny circular watch face to a giant plasma screen TV. We've got touch screen tablets in there. We've got clickable desktops, remote-controlled television sets. Hey, even refrigerators have browsers these days. And all of these screens exist on top of completely varying hardware. Everything from a $50 smartphone to a $700 or $800 Pixel or iPhone. It's pretty crazy because not only do they have to just show up on those screens, but they have to run at 60 frames per second. They've got to have silky smooth animations to the touch or to the swipe or to the click. Now with progressive web apps, they should work offline. They should be engaging and re-engaging for your users. Now, all of that is even more extremely amplified when you think about the primitives that web developers are given. We've got markup. We've got headers. We've got lists, paragraphs, right? And this hasn't really changed much in the last 20 years. So it's kind of crazy to think about how, these are great for markup, but what we're trying to do now is build rich, immersive interfaces and applications. And we still have to work with this at our core to get these things done. So I know a bunch of you have tried to do this before, but let's take an example of something that should be very easy, because it's something that everybody tries to do, which is build a UI tab. Right? This is something that should be trivial to build in 2017. In fact, it should be easy to build in 2011 or 2014 for that matter. But it's actually kind of a big pain in the butt. So let's just go over a few ways of the many that you can do this. This would be a pretty typical Bootstrap or Foundation, right? You download a CSS library, some CSS wizard has done all the magic for you, and you just assign a tag or a class name, and boom, you've got beautifully rendered UI. You could mix HTML and JavaScript, maybe use some sort of jQuery to help you manipulate the DOM, assign properties. You could do everything in JavaScript, right? Just creating these objects. And you can even use an innovative framework to take a string of HTML, pack it into an object, and help you reason about this better. Right? So this just, 4 little examples, but as I'm sure you and Stack Overflow knows, there are so many ways to go about doing something as simple as building tabs. And while that's great, because the web is open and there's tons of solutions to the problem, it becomes an issue when we try to share code and when we try to reuse things and not reinvent the wheel for every project, because these are not interoperable solutions. That means that if I'm working on a project and I've got my stack, and she's working on her project and she's got her stack, and she makes this beautiful map interface with markers, and I can draw shapes, and I want to use that, unless we're using exactly the same stack, it doesn't work, right? And that's not just for 2 individuals, but what if you're working at the same company, say a big company, a big search engine company, and one team is working on something and your team's working on something else, and you want to integrate? You can't use the components that they've made if you're not on the same stack. If you're creating a project with one framework and you want to switch to a different method, you can't even share with yourself, right? Contrast that with HTML. Even though it's very simple and low level, if I were to create some super fancy HTML table with just native JavaScript, and I wanted to share that with any of you or vice versa, easy, right? Browser's going to understand HTML. Any framework that just processes natural HTML will understand that. So you might be thinking, HTML's cool, it doesn't quite meet the challenge, but I would love if it could just do a little more, right? You might be thinking, how could we redesign HTML for expectations of now, right? For the modern and mobile web, the web that is not on a beefy desktop computer, the web that every day is becoming more and more accessible on anything but a beefy desktop computer. Because right now, what we have is a mess. We have div soup. I don't know how anyone could reason about this code, debug it, learn from it. And I can say that, right? Because this is us, this is Gmail. Instead of div soup, what if you just could reason about the front end of your app with something that was way more beautiful, right? Something like this. Ooh. These are really standard mobile web and regular web design conventions. Icons, input bars, floating action buttons, and even this hidden drawer panel that would swipe out if you needed it. What if we opened up code and we saw encapsulated HTML tags that look just like this? That would be cool. So maybe we build a better framework, right? Maybe we build a framework that can do this for us. But then we'll run into the same issue, right? Where if you're not using this new framework, you can't play, you can't share. So the better response is we need to build a better web. We need to make the web do more for us. We need to be lazy and say, hey, browser, you need to do your job, and you need to do more heavy lifting for the team. But the web isn't owned by anyone, right? It's not like Android or iOS, where you can go to a company and say, hey, we really want these features in our closed ecosystem. Can you help us? Right? It's really hard to try to get a bunch of the internet people to agree on making new stuff. So where do you even start? Well, if we think about it, it's really not that far off from what we already have. The web platform is already incredibly powerful. And while it may be frustrating at times, we can take a look at just a small case study of a very humble element and see that the proof is in the pudding. So here's our humble little select element. I'm sure we've all seen this guy before, whether or not we've done front-end development. It is a simple element in that this is all the code it takes for any browser to recognize that you want a drop-down menu. It's composable, right? All you have to do is put more declarative, simple things right into that box, and there you go. It's full of objects. That's simple. It's also declarative. If you have a property, like in this case, disabled or selected, you just write it. That's all you do, and there you go. See these? They just faded right out. It's flexible. You can have different types of children. So if you want to group things together, you can do just that. And even more importantly, it's forgiving, right? So if you drop a paragraph in there by accident, the whole thing isn't going to freak out. Your computer's not going to blow up. It's just going to quietly ignore the mistake. It's going to know, I only accept options, option groups. I don't know what a p tag is. The two most important things, it's accessible out of the box. This is very important because we create products for everybody. So something that's baked right into the browser is going to be picked up by a screen reader, accessed by accessible technology, and you don't even really have to think much about it. And also, they're programmable. So they expose APIs, simple things like adding event listeners for changes, exposing different public properties and methods for its attributes, and you don't really have to do much. So all in all, this is pretty amazing. Just this tiny little element. Declarative, encapsulated, reusable, super cool. So now you might be thinking, I want more elements like this, right? And at the platform level, we could say, all right, let's send out a big survey to a bunch of developers and find out what they want. Or as I learned this morning at a talk on GitHub and data, I could just run a big query all over GitHub and see what super popular things people are putting in their applications and kind of get a feel for what people want. And we could make a big new push in HTML, create these objects, and just send them out. But I think the first reaction was, I want more elements like this. And because you're developers, your second reaction was, I want to build elements like this. Because if we, as the web platform, said, OK, we'll release a bunch of new HTML components into the public, we would have the same problem again, because people would take and use, and they would just want more, because they would see how powerful it was just to write natively. Right? So that would be cool. What if we could expose some low-level APIs that everybody could use and create their own native HTML to share with anybody? And if you've used Polymer before, or if you're familiar with web components, you know you can already do this with web components, right? Web components are a collection of low-level browser APIs that allow you to create new, custom, reusable, encapsulated HTML objects to use in any web page. It will render in any browser natively, and they'll work across almost anything. And because they're standards-based, they'll be quick, they'll be native. So now, let's revisit the definition of Polymer and see that Polymer is an opinionated library that sugars the Web Components APIs to make it easy to build encapsulated, reusable custom elements. So all we do as the Polymer team in the Polymer library is say, OK, there's these 4 low-level browser APIs. We're going to make them more ergonomic for you. We're going to add a UX layer over it. We're going to help you with things like data binding and templating, give you a suite of tools and testing infrastructure to work with, and help you streamline your process of building custom elements. So when you use Web Components and Polymer, you deal with less markup, you deal with less JavaScript. So overall, you're dealing with less confusion. There's no div soup. If you want to create this material design, paper-looking tab system, we've created an element called paper tabs. I'm sure a bunch of other developers have created really great equivalent elements. They're all on webcomponents.org, and that's what it would look like. So this is powerful for prototyping. This is powerful for real applications because it makes it a lot easier to reason about and encapsulate your code. It's pretty nice overall. All right, so that's Polymer. Now let's define something else. Let's define progressive web apps. When I first started hearing about progressive web apps, it would come, it would go, and I finally sat a couple people down and I was like, is there a concrete definition of progressive web apps? Or is it like this big thought? Is it happening? How do I know if it's happening? How do I know if I built a progressive web app? And I don't know if that's like a familiar feeling, but I certainly felt it. So what I'm going to do is kind of lay out what a progressive web app is, because the short answer is that no, there's not a concrete definition, but the longer answer is that there are a bunch of things that constitute a progressive web app, and it's not your job to do every single one, but you'll want to do a good deal of them. All right. There is an engineer who works on Chrome. His name is Alex Russell. He is one of the main thought leaders behind progressive web apps, and he wrote this article about a year ago where he said something that has been quoted over and over again. It's the simplest definition of progressive web apps that I've heard, and it is basically that progressive web apps are just websites that took all the right vitamins. Sounds nice. Vitamins are good. I want a website that takes vitamins. But what are vitamins? In this case, a progressive web app is just a website that works the way you want it to. We're so used to using native apps that we want something that works when it's offline, that feels like it was tailor-made for our device, that can send push notifications, that can engage your users. And well, what if websites could just do all that cool stuff for you? What if it could feel like it was made for my device? What if it could engage me and be immersive? Those are the vitamins. So it kind of straddles somewhere between website and application, but it is a website. And this is extremely important for the users around the world. The growth on the web is coming solely from markets that aren't the United States and Europe, right? I mentioned this earlier, but most people in the world access the web through mobile. I mean, even if you think about your day-to-day, when you're not at work and you're just browsing the internet or you're looking things up, that's done on your phone, right? Or maybe a tablet or a laptop or a different screen size. It's everywhere. And so it's really important for someone who might not have the network connectivity or a data plan that's affordable enough to download a really heavy application, let alone the gigabyte storage space on their device to have apps just for recreation. Or maybe they can't access a site because they never know what their connection's going to be like, and they don't want to wait 12 seconds to see something load on the screen and get like anxiety every time they want to change the page. And we've already seen that this is actually a really, really successful move for businesses. I'm just going to show a few examples, but there's a link up here to a bunch more case studies where you can see how progressive web apps have had significant business impact for large companies. AliExpress saw twice as many page visits per session on their progressive web app. meaning that people who went on their progressive web app saw way less friction and therefore navigated around their site way more freely. And this is a big website. And for new users, this is people who had no brand awareness. They didn't have any preconceived notions about their site. They saw a tremendous 104% increase in conversion rate. That's people who actually spent money on their site because it was that much easier to use. Konga and Jumia, two major African e-commerce platforms, saw that their progressive web app loaded twice as fast as their previous website. Twice as fast. And it used 6 times less data than their native app counterparts, which is a very, very big deal because in a lot of these markets, data is extremely expensive and a luxury that most people just don't have or don't value. And just to drive this home, how did they do this? How did they achieve this success? Progressive web apps. And I'll break down the definition now that we see the value here. But the buzzwords or the big phrases that a progressive web app has is it's a website that's reliable, fast, and engaging. So let's pull these 3 apart, look at the how, the why, and the what of each of them. So first we've got reliability. What does that mean? It means that this app loads instantly regardless of your network connection. It's pretty strange to hear about a website, but it's true. What this does is it'll send less data for initial page loads and save your users money. And we do this with service workers. Has anyone here heard of service workers, built a service worker? Awesome. Cool. So I saw this tweet a few weeks ago, an article that was written on service workers, where the author says, if you're wondering what a service worker is, it's like a little alien that lives on your page and relays messages for you. So I actually think about it the same way. It's basically a smart caching system, much like a client-side proxy that you program with JavaScript, and it understands different routes and different requests and figures out ways to cache that information and push it to the user, right? So every time I work with a service worker, I imagine like this little woman, alien lady, sitting right in the browser and dealing with all of it for me. Next, we know that progressive web apps are fast. But what we mean by fast is that there's no janky scrolling or slow-to-load interfaces. So like when you pull on the screen or when you drag, it actually moves with you. And it doesn't take, you don't move the page up and see blank and wait for that part to load. And this is really crucial. I'm sure you've seen tons of data on this, but studies have shown that over half of your users will abandon your site if it takes longer than 3 seconds to load. It's not that long. And an engineer on my team, Monica, she makes this joke, like if you wouldn't make eye contact with a stranger for however long it takes your app to load, you need to do better, right? Because a lot of us are just sitting on the bus or the train and waiting for things to load and looking around. So that's kind of her rule of thumb. And this is a hard one to manage because everybody's app is different and we want to make sure that all things load fast. But what we've done is kind of created this method or this pattern called the purple pattern to help you think about how to push things, how to render things, how to load things. Now, this could be a whole separate talk, and there actually are a lot of talks and articles online about the purple pattern. But to break it down, it stands for push, using HTTP2 push, render, only the critical route or bundle. So you want to bundle your app based on different shells or different routes that a user might take, and only push the critical one. Then you want to pre-cache the necessary files with a service worker, so everything peripheral or tangential, whatever you think the user might go to next, you'll pre-cache that for them. And finally, lazy load your content. So only actually load and push when you see that the user has made a gesture that indicates that they actually want to read it. Again, I said this could be a separate talk. This is one of my favorite talks about the purple pattern. It was from the Polymer Summit in London just a few months ago, where Paul Irish and Sam Saccone live pulled up a website that uses the purple pattern and optimized it. If you could see in the top corner, there's that little green window with the sunglass emoji. And they had this like live quiz game where there were about 750 people in the audience, and they said, okay, I want you all to log into this web app and guess what sort of reaction that this web app might have, depending on what changes we make. And they took out dev tools and they sort of looked through. So if you're looking for a way to quiz yourself and help yourself learn more about performance on the web, this is a really cool talk to take a look at. I also learned a lot about using dev tools from it. And the third is engagement. So this also is a little more obscure, so we put a definition. Engaging means that it really lives anywhere an app can. It can send notification to the user. When you open it, it doesn't show a URL bar. It really feels like an app. And this is good because it will allow people to interact more, right? Because of that real estate on the screen, because of that real estate in the app drawer, because it will pop up on search, users have more entry points and more reminders that your web app, your website is present. And you can increase transactions by reaching back out to your users. Say you have an e-commerce platform and you've abandoned a cart, or say you have a news platform and they've read an article and a similar one has come up. You can push that to the user using our APIs and using Add to Home Screen. You might have seen over the last few days a bunch of news about Chrome 57. We're finally making progressive web apps first-class citizens on Android, which means that anywhere a native app could live or could be, a progressive web app will also live and be in your app drawer, on your home screen, on any of your pages, in your app search. And developers, people, they're very excited about this because a user will know it's a web app because they saved it to the home screen. But other than that, they really won't know the difference, except they'll see that it takes up way less storage on their phone. As it pertains to web push, this is an API. The documentation is pretty good, but there's also a talk from Last.io from Pete LePage, who's a developer advocate at Google, and he kind of walks through cool stuff. He's also a super dynamic speaker, as you can see from the screenshot. And I mentioned Add to Home Screen. This is actually pretty simple to do, but we also have a code lab that'll walk you through it. It'll walk you through editing your manifest file. It'll walk you through interacting with your service worker to get this all done. The time estimate is about 29 minutes. And it says supported, right? It says the earliest browser, we recommend Chrome, but the earliest you'll have to go back to is 47. So it's been around for a bit and it works. Cool. So we kind of know what PWAs are, right? And we know how technically we can make those happen. But what do they look like, right? What does this cross between a website and a native app look like? And can they actually do cool stuff? Can they actually do what we say they do? So I have two pretty different but pretty cool applications to show. Was anyone at the Polymer Summit by any chance? All right, so this is going to be new. I get to go show this off. So we created something to help people interact with each other, to kind of facilitate interactions with new friends, with the team, and we called it Polymon. We had a bunch of magical creatures. You could go around and collect them and battle each other. It was a pretty innovative new idea. And I'll show you. So this is a web app. It is 100% web-based. It's not native at all. But this is the demo of a battle scene. So as you could see, super rich graphics. There's no URL bar taking up any real estate. You could click around with your player, the other player. These are two people playing each other. You lock in your moves, and you've got these super rich graphics, really cool game logic, and you could see it all play out. Here we go. And this is a website. If you were to play this on mobile, it would look like, on desktop, it would look like it was a web app. You could check it out at polymon.polymer-project.org. And you might have to comb through Twitter to get the codes for the Polymon because they're attached to Polymer team members. But I don't know, I was pretty impressed by that. And then here's another one. This is a bit more simple. This is a template that we have available. So you can fork this repo and just use it yourself. It was built by Rob Dodson, who makes the Polycast videos, who's a developer advocate at Google. and it is a blog template that he called Super Cool Blog. But you could see it's snappy. It's got a great UI. You click on things, and it just loads very naturally, and it's got a pretty sleek UI. So you could play around with that. It's got a floating action button, and also it's a website, but it doesn't at all look or feel like a website. It looks and it feels like a native app. So if you're feeling like this is a lot to handle or this is a lot of new stuff, the good news is that we're here to help. Developers.google.com/web has a ton of content on progressive web apps. In fact, right on the front page, one of our main links and one of the things we talk about most is progressive web apps. It's got case studies. I linked to that earlier. It's got code labs. I showed one of those, videos, documentation. And because the definition of progressive web apps isn't hard and concrete, it also has the progressive web apps checklist. And it's super helpful because you'll see here, but it doesn't just tell you different features that a progressive web app could have. It tells you how to test to see if you have those features and how to fix them if they're not quite working. So let's play this. Quick scroll. Yep, so here's the checklist. Got a bunch of stuff like serving over HTTPS. This is just the baseline checklist. It says that they're responsive, that the start of your URL is cached and will load, instantly. A bunch of other cool stuff, right? First load is fast, even when you're just on 3G. It works across all browsers. Your transitions don't feel like they block the network, etc. And then we've got like a slew more other cool ideas for you. There's a lot, so I'm gonna scroll quickly through them. But only implement these things if they're useful for you, and this is just sort of ideas. All right, and now this is leading into the last part of the talk, which is about Polymer and progressive web apps, because we have a head start for you. The Polymer Project's app toolbox, which I'll explain here. The Polymer Project's app toolbox is quite literally a toolbox that you can use to help you build progressive web apps with web components. We handle things for you like templating, layouts, because responsive layouts can be tricky to reason about, localization. Almost all of these companies that built PWAs exist in many, many countries and need to be able to translate on the fly or serve different content on the fly. We help with routing from page to page, client side, app storage. We have elements to help you integrate with Firebase or PouchDB or anything there. We also help you with service workers. I'm just going to touch on one of these because I am always excited by this feature, and it's probably one of our most popular app toolbox features, and that is templating. So when you go on the Polymer project site, polymer-project.org, and you click on App Toolbox, this is what you see first. We've got all the features on the left-hand side there, and then a whole description here. But if you just scroll down to the bottom, you can read more of our documentation, or you can click Build an App. And this doesn't take you to more documentation as much as it takes you to an install script for getting set up. So you install the Polymer CLI, but if you already have that, all you have to do is initialize a project from a template, which requires creating a directory and running one CLI script. And I have a demo of that as well. So here you'll see my fancy Chrome extension. But there is my terminal there. I am creating a directory. I hope you can see the text. I just made a directory. I'm changing into the directory. I'm showing you there's nothing in it. It's not a magic trick. And now I run Polymer init. And you can make a bunch of things, right? You can have a blank element template. We also have a blank application template if you just want to start fresh. We have an Ecommerce demo for our shop. And we also have Starter Kit, which gives you a reactive template with purple pattern loading and stuff baked right in. So you'll see it just takes seconds. It installs the dependencies. on different components. And then we're done. So now I'm going to check what's in the directory. And we've got tons of stuff. We've got all of the JSON files we could ever want. We've got a service worker generated for us. And all we have to do to check this out is type in another CLI command, which is Polymer serve, runs an express server in the back. And if you use -- open, it'll open up right for you. And you already have a purple pattern service worker progressive web app in your browser. So you can click around, and we can check out how responsive this is, use dev tools to render it on different popular smartphones. It's iPhone 5. This is Nexus 5X, which is a different aspect ratio. You can still click around, look at, let's say, the iPad Pro, completely different shape. Still renders quickly. And let's look at one more, which is Galaxy S5. And now what we're going to do is see if it works offline. So we're going to go into DevTools. We're going to cut out our internet connection by clicking offline and navigate again. And see, I switched the page. The 2 actually showed up. Now the 3 is showing up. And this thing works offline. And I didn't do anything except run one command line script to install it and one command line script to serve it. So once you've built a progressive web app, how can you evaluate it? Right? How do you know from that checklist if any of these things work, or if you see a progressive web app online, can you evaluate that one? Can you see if that one's good? Can you check out your competitors' sites and see if theirs are any good and how they stack up relative to yours? Because we know this is like a pretty common question, we created a tool called Lighthouse, which has been around for a little while. It's in beta now, but we intend to do way more cool stuff with this in the future. And I wanted to show a quick demo of Lighthouse. You could find that also on developers.google.com. It's a Chrome extension. Sits right in your browser, so you can, whenever you're on any site, I do this often, just like pull up Lighthouse and see how it's built or what features it has. This demo is going to be of Chrome status.com, where you can check out Chrome features and adoption in Chrome of different platform features. It happens to be a progressive web app that also happens to be built with Polymer. But let's see the demo and how it works. So here we are. We just click right on the extension, click generate, and now we can see Lighthouse at work. So it's running through a slew of tests. It sees how well it caches. It shuts your internet off and renders it there. It puts it into different shapes to see how responsive it is and how quickly it responds. Takes a look at how you've attached event listeners and does a bunch of other stuff, like has a really pretty animation of a lighthouse that goes in circles. And at the end of it, it generates a report for you. So this one did really well, 99 out of 100. And it shows you all the relevant data and all the cool stuff that it noticed while it was on your site, like load times and how you're pushing content. You could do this for any site online. So you could see, again, how you stack up or how your favorite site does. And if people are still into this, you could print it out. You could also save it as a PDF from there and track your progress as you develop. We see on Twitter lots of people sending their reports at us and showing us their growth, and it's super cool to see how this is actually helping people test and build and retest. All right, so we went in through Polymer. We talked about definition of that, problems we're solving. We talked about progressive web apps, how we define those, what the technology is behind all of them. And then at the end, we went into the app toolbox, Lighthouse, resources, and how you can get started fast building your own progressive web app with Polymer. I just want to put out a statement that you can build a progressive web app with any framework. These are not specific to Polymer at all. So if there's one you prefer and one you like using, feel free to use that. You also don't only have to use Polymer to build progressive web apps. You can make little components. You can build standard apps. When you create your components, you could put those on webcomponents.org for other people to use. Or you could just go on webcomponents.org and download some for yourself. you could take a pen or a sticker on your way out. The pens have our website on them, so if you want to remember that, it's an easy way to. And finally, again, I want to thank you guys for coming to this talk. I wanted to leave plenty of time for questions. You can find me on Twitter there at WMGinsberg. I would love to see anything any of you build. If you tweet at Polymer, that's also me that's going to be reading them. I read every tweet that comes into the Polymer account, believe it or not. And I would really love to see the stuff you build. So yeah, thank you.